The need for commodity production under socialism and its fundamental features, the rapid growth of socialist industry, the collectivization of agriculture, and the elimination on this basis of the last exploiting class, the kulaks, led to further changes in the nature of commodity production and commodity circulation. Not understanding the dialectics of development, the fundamental change in the function and purpose of trade and money circulation after the victory of socialism, some economists came to the anti-Marxist conclusion that the entry of the USSR into the period of socialism makes commodity circulation unnecessary, causes the withering away of trade and money, raises the question of an immediate transition to direct product exchange. Back in the early 1930s, Stalin showed the groundlessness and harmfulness of these views, the need for the all-round deployment of Soviet trade to strengthen economic ties between town and country, the need to save money until the end of the first phase of communism, the socialist stage of development. To strengthen the connection between town and country, it was necessary to supplement the production link between them with a commodity link, which could only be achieved through the deployment of all forms of Soviet trade, state, cooperative, collective farm. The expansion of trade between town and country, between regions of the country, between various sectors of the national economy is necessary to stimulate further growth in industrial and agricultural production. Stalin especially emphasized that the development of Soviet trade in the new economic conditions would be completely wrong to regard as some kind of return to the first stage of NEP. Then, at the first stage of NEP, trade allowed the revival of capitalism and the functioning of the private capitalist sector in trade. Soviet trade, on the other hand, is trade without capitalists and speculators, a trade of a special kind, which until now has not been known in history. Denying the necessity of commodity production under socialism, some economists referred to the formula of F. Engels that commodity production will be eliminated as soon as society takes possession of the means of production. Stalin explained that this formula of F. Engels was interpreted incorrectly. It was not taken into account that it means the transfer into the public domain not of part of the means of production, but of all means of production both in industry and in agriculture. It cannot, therefore, be applied to conditions when the national form of property does not yet encompass all means of production. But it is precisely such conditions that are characteristic of the socialist stage of the development of society. The completion of the collectivization of agriculture and the elimination on this basis of the last exploiting class, the kulaks, meant the completion of the socialist socialization of all the basic means of production. But this did not eliminate the need for commodity production and circulation on the basis of new economic conditions, since at the socialist stage of the development of society, public ownership of the means of production and the products of labor is not yet the only and all-embracing form of ownership. The level of socialization of the means of production and products of labor in industry and agriculture under socialism is not the same. Along with state, that is, national, property, there is collective farm property. There is no way to confuse these two forms of socialist property. The state cannot yet dispose of all the products of society and distribute them in accordance with the various social and personal needs of citizens directly, without using commodity exchange. The socialist state can only dispose of the products of state enterprises. As for the products of the collective farms, although the decisive means of agricultural production belonging to the state, machines of the machine and tractor stations, land, participate in its creation, but the products themselves are the property of individual collective farms and are at their complete disposal. This is due to the fact that collective farms use their own labor, their seeds and, in fact, dispose of the land transferred to them by the state for eternal use as their property. It should also be taken into account that collective farmers receive in their personal ownership a part of the output of the collective farms, distributed according to workdays, and that collective farmers have their own subsidiary plots on their plots. Surplus products owned by collective farmers are also intended for exchange and enter the market as a commodity. Disposing of collective farm products as their property, collective farms do not want to alienate their products except in the form of goods, in exchange for which they want to receive the goods they need. Collective farms do not currently accept other economic ties with the city, except for commodity ones, except for exchange through purchase and sale. Therefore, commodity production and trade, we are now the same necessity, as they were, say, 30 years ago, when Lapin declared the need for full reversal trade. Commodity production under socialism is the result of the fact that two main production sectors remain in the national economy, the state sector, based on public ownership, and the collective farm sector, based on the group ownership of individual artels with public ownership of the decisive means of production. This means that commodity production under socialism cannot but differ radically from commodity production under capitalism. It also differs from commodity production during the transition period from capitalism to socialism, that is, in a multi-structured economy. The fundamental features of commodity production under socialism are as follows. First, socialist ownership of the means of production reigns supreme under socialism. Therefore, commodity production and circulation are carried out without capitalists. Small and large goods are manufactured by united socialist producers, the state, collective farms, and cooperatives. Secondly, the sphere of action of commodity production and circulation under socialism is limited mainly to articles of personal consumption, since all the decisive means of production do not enter commodity circulation, but are distributed by the state. Thirdly, in view of this, and also due to the socialization of all means of production and the complete elimination of the system of exploitation, commodity production under socialism cannot develop into capitalist production. It, together with its money economy, is called upon to serve the development and strengthening of socialist production. Commodity production under socialism has a planned character, develops in accordance with the plan of the entire national economy, is subordinate to the requirements of the basic economic law of socialism and the law of planned development of the national economy. The goal of commodity production under socialism is not to make profits, but to meet the growing needs of the Soviet people. This determines the constant concern of the party and the socialist state to expand the production of consumer goods, to comprehensively take into account and satisfy the tastes and needs of society, to pursue a policy of systematic price reduction to increase the level of real incomes of the working people. These are the features of commodity production under socialism. This is not ordinary commodity production, as the history preceding socialism knew it, but commodity production of a special kind. It is fundamentally different from commodity production under capitalism, completely excludes capitalists, the transformation of means of production into capital and labor power into commodities, excludes the exploitation of man by man. Thanks to public ownership of the means of production, the elimination of the system of wage labor and the system of exploitation, thanks to the planned management of the national economy in accordance with the objective economic laws of socialism, commodity production under socialism does not have such unlimited and all-embracing distribution as under capitalism. The sphere of action of commodity production under socialism is strictly limited and framed. Limitation of the sphere of commodity production under socialism. In a socialist economy, the means of production created at state enterprises are not commodities, since in their overwhelming part they are not sold to any buyer, but are distributed by the state among its enterprises. By transferring the means of production to this or that enterprise, the state does not in any way lose ownership of them. The directors of enterprises who have received the means of production from the state do not become their owners, but are only authorized by the state to use them in accordance with state plans. Even to collective farms, the state only sells small implements, which do not decide the fate of collective farm production. Such basic means of production as tractors, combines and many other agricultural machines are not sold, not to mention land, which is also completely excluded from the sphere of commodity circulation. The concentration of the main means of agricultural production in the hands of the state is one of the most important conditions for the rapid growth and improvement of agricultural production. Stalin showed the profound fallacy of the proposal of some economists to sell the main instruments of production of the MTS as the property of the collective farms. This would mean turning back the wheel of history. Sale of basic, critical means of production in the collective ownership would have drove huge losses and would bankrupt them, would undermine the mechanization of agriculture and would reduce the rate of collective farm production. At the same time, it would lead to an expansion of the sphere of commodity circulation, would place the collective farms in an exceptional position, which no state enterprise has, and would alienate collective farm property from public property. All this would lead not to an approach to communism, but, on the contrary, to a distance from it. Thus, relations between state socialist enterprises cannot be subsumed under the category of commodity relations, and the supply of state socialist enterprises with means of production cannot be attributed to the sphere of commodity circulation. The preservation of commodity production under socialism is caused by the existence of two forms of socialist property, state, public and collective farm property. Therefore, the goods under the conditions of a socialist economy are, first of all, the surplus of collective farm production, which are alienated by collective farms and collective farmers in the order of purchase and sale and thus are included in the system of commodity circulation. This surplus consists mainly of agricultural raw materials and personal products. Being the public property of collective farms or the personal property of collective farmers, these products of collective farm production are transferred to the disposal of the state in the form of agricultural procurement, obligatory deliveries, contracting, purchases by state organizations and cooperatives, or sold by collective farms and collective farmers on the collective farm market. If the surplus of collective farm products are commodities and are alienated by collective farms through purchase and sale, then products produced by state industry and intended for the rural population should also be alienated through purchase and sale. This means that under socialism that part of the output of socialist industry which, in the order of sale and purchase, is transferred to the public property of the collective farms and to the personal property of the collective farmers, cannot but be commodities. This mass of commodities consists mainly of personal and in a small part of the small equipment, fertilizers and so on. But it is clear that it is impossible to ensure the exchange of one of the products of state enterprises by the sale of products of collective farming, without turning in goods and that significant part of the corresponding production, which is intended for the consumption of the urban population. In other words, the use of commodity circulation for the exchange of products of state socialist industry for products of collective farm production necessitates purchase and sale, commodity circulation in the matter of supplying consumer goods to the entire population of the country. Therefore, all products of personal consumption are produced by socialist industry as commodities. Thus, goods under socialism are all that part of the products of socialist industry, which in the order of purchase and sale is transferred to the public property of collective farms and to the personal property of citizens. Finally, goods under socialism are all those products of socialist production that are sold abroad. By exporting these products, the state transfers ownership of them to buyers. The transformation of the products of labor into commodities also under socialism means their transformation into values. And under socialism, a commodity is a unity of use, value and value. But there are no antagonistic contradictions between these two sides of the commodity under socialism, since as a result of the socialization of the means of production and the planned organization of the production process, labor has become directly social. Concrete labor, which creates use values, is no longer opposed to abstract labor, which forms the value of commodities, just as private labor to social labor. The goods produced by socialist enterprises are directly products of social labor. The labor expended in their production does not need any special social recognition through exchange. In a socialist economy, goods are produced not for the sake of their value, but in order to maximize the satisfaction of the various needs of members of society. This means that, by its economic nature, a commodity under socialism is fundamentally different from a commodity under conditions of private ownership of the means of production. This determines the exceptionally important importance in socialist production of the use value of goods, all-round concern for the assortment and quality of products. At the same time, a systematic reduction in the cost of goods and their value by increasing labor productivity through the introduction of more advanced technology and better methods of organizing socialist production is of great importance for socialist society. Revealing the nature of commodity production under socialism, Stalin showed the need for a strict distinction between the content of the economic process and its form, between deep-seated development processes and superficial phenomena. The point is, wrote Stalin, that in our socialist conditions, economic development does not take place in the order of revolutions, but in the order of gradual changes, when the old is not just completely abolished, but changes its nature in relation to the new, retaining only its form. And the new not only destroys the old, but penetrates the old, changes its nature, its functions, without breaking its form, but using it for the development of the new. This is the case not only with goods, but also with money in our economic circulation, as well as with banks, which, losing their old functions and acquiring new ones, retain the old form used by the socialist system. As a result of this development, we have mainly retained a form, an outward appearance from the old categories of capitalism. In essence, however, they have radically changed in accordance with the needs of the development of the socialist national economy. The significance of these instructions of Stalin is especially clearly seen in the example of the characterization of the economic nature of the means of production under socialism. Outwardly, from the formal point of view, the means of production are almost indistinguishable from consumer goods if viewed from the point of view of value and its forms. As you know, in a socialist economy, 1. Prices are set for all products of labor, including means of production, although the latter are not commodities. 2. The distribution of not only goods for personal consumption, but also of the means of production, which under socialism are not goods, takes place using the principle of payment, that is, in the form of purchase and sale. 3. A monetary calculation of the costs of each enterprise for the manufacture and transportation of all products is carried out. The cost of all products, including the means of production, is established. 4. Profitability, that is, profitability, is established for all enterprises, including enterprises producing means of production, and this profitability is determined by comparing the cash receipts for the production of the enterprise with the cost of production. It is obvious that, having ceased to be commodities, the means of production have retained, however, the outer shell of the commodity. This is reflected in the calculation of the cost of the means of production, in the establishment of prices for them, in the implementation of monetary calculations when transferring the means of production from one state enterprise to another, etc. The concepts of cost, price, etc. are applied to the means of production only in this sense. The situation is different if the movement of the means of production goes beyond the limits of interstate circulation. In the field of foreign trade, the means of production produced by socialist enterprises are indeed commodities, they are indeed sold. Thus, to determine the essence of an economic phenomenon, it is necessary to take not the form, but its internal content, considered in inseparable connection with the forms of ownership, which most fully express the essence of production relations. Within the country, even in relations between state enterprises, the turnover of means of production is carried out in commodity form, as well as foreign trade turnover. But in the field of foreign trade, the means of production produced by socialist enterprises retain the properties of goods both in essence and in form, while in the field of economic circulation within the country, the means of production retain only the outer shell of goods. It follows from what has been said that under socialism there remains an objective economic necessity for commodity production and commodity circulation. However, the sphere of commodity production is limited here mainly by items of personal consumption. As for such economic categories as commodity, money, profit, interest, etc., under socialism they retain the old form used by the socialist system, but the function and purpose of these categories have radically changed. The law of value as the law of commodity production and exchange. The reasons for the existence of the law of value under socialism. The peculiarities of commodity production in the USSR also determine the peculiarities of the operation of the law of value under socialism, since the law of value is the law of commodity production and exchange. The law of value occupies a special place among economic laws. It cannot be attributed to laws that are valid in all socio-economic formations, since it acts only under certain economic conditions. But at the same time, it is not a law that operates only in any one social formation. As the law of commodity production and exchange, it is valid for many modes of production. What is the role of the law of value under socialism? In order to answer this question, it is necessary to say a few words about the operation of the law of value in the conditions of a capitalist economy. It was already indicated above that under conditions of private ownership of the means of production, the social character of labor remains hidden. It can manifest itself only through the market equating of the products of labor, goods. Only in the market, in the process of exchange, the commodity producer learns to what extent the individual costs of his commodity correspond to socially necessary costs. Being a monetary expression of the value of a commodity, a form of its manifestation, price is at the same time an instrument of the spontaneous action of the law of value. In all social formations, production ultimately serves consumption. But under the domination of private ownership of the means of production, the immediate goal of production is not to satisfy the needs of people, but to create value in order to obtain the products of labor of other commodity producers in exchange or to extract surplus value. This determines the actions of the law of value as a spontaneous regulator of commodity production. By means of spontaneous fluctuations in prices, spontaneous deviations of the prices of goods from their value, the law of value regulates the distribution of social labor among the branches of production. Capital always rushes to those industries where profits are highest, and, conversely, leaves those industries that are less profitable. In all cases when the price of a commodity turns out to be higher than its value, the production of this commodity becomes more profitable. Additional capital rushes into this industry, hence additional quantities of labor and means of production. This entails the expansion of the size of production, ultimately, the overflow of the market and a fall in the price of this product. The fall in prices makes the production of this commodity less profitable, which causes either the introduction of various kinds of technical improvements aimed at increasing the exploitation of workers in order to extract more surplus value, or the outflow of capital from this branch of production to other sectors. This is, in the most general outline, the mechanism of action of the law of value as a spontaneous regulator of commodity production. The operation of the law of value leads to an enormous increase in the exploitation of labor by capital, to the impoverishment of the broad masses of the population, to the concentration of wealth in the hands of a small group of capital magnates. This process is especially intensified at the modern, monopoly stage of capitalism, the main features and requirements of the basic economic law of which is to ensure maximum capitalist profit through the exploitation, ruin and impoverishment of the majority of the population of a given country, by enslaving and systematic robbery of the peoples of other countries, especially backward countries, finally, through wars and the militarization of the national economy, used to ensure the highest profits. Thus, the law of value is a law that spontaneously regulates the distribution of social labor between branches of production in accordance with the needs of society through fluctuations in commodity prices around value. The main requirements of the law of value are that the individual expenditures of labor for the production of goods must receive public recognition as certain shares of total social labor. The obligation to recognize individual labor costs as the cost of a share of total social labor manifests itself as market pressure, as a coercive force of competition. This is how matters stand with the law of value under conditions of domination of private ownership of the means of production. For a long time, the idea was widespread among economists that the law of value did not work in a socialist economy. The denial of the operation of the law of value under socialism was the result of a dogmatic interpretation of some of the remarks made by K. Marx regarding the fate of commodity production and the law of value after the socialist socialization of the means of production. The law of value was mistakenly viewed exclusively as a spontaneously acting force inherent in an anarchic capitalist economy, but allegedly completely incompatible with the planned nature of our national economy. It turned out to be an absurd situation. There are goods and money, there is value, but there is no law of value. Some economists put forward and tried to substantiate the position that the law of value is eternal, since it supposedly acts as a permanent regulator of production. Therefore, this law will also exist under communism. This statement reproduced Bukharin's theory of labor costs, long exposed and discarded as anti-Marxist. As you know, the right-wing restorers of capitalism needed such a theory in order to justify the unleashing of the market element, to subordinate the Soviet economy to the spontaneous action of the law of value, to give freedom for the growth of capitalist elements in our country. The statement about the eternity of the law of value in essence meant a fetishization of this law as an elemental force, the actions of which are inevitable. It turned out that the task of national economic planning is reduced only to identifying those proportions in the distribution of social labor, which are determined by the law of value as a supposedly eternal regulator of production, and to promote the implementation of these proportions. It was widely believed that the law of value under socialism operates in a transformed form. The basis of this view was voluntarism, the misconception that the Soviet state and its governing bodies could abolish existing economic laws, transform them, create new economic laws. The formula about the radical transformation of the law of value meant, in fact, a refusal to deeply study the causes and limits of the operation of this law in the socialist economy. All these misconceptions were deeply criticized in Stalin's work Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR. Stalin explained that where there is a commodity and commodity production, there cannot be no law of value. At the same time, he showed the historical nature of the law of value, the dependence of its existence and action on certain economic conditions. Value, like the law of value, is a historical category associated with the existence of commodity production. With the disappearance of commodity production, value with its forms and the law of value will disappear. The law of value is the regulator of production only under certain economic conditions characteristic of the capitalist mode of production and absent in socialist society. Stalin showed the objective nature of economic laws, the inconsistency and harmfulness of voluntarism, leading to the denial of economic science, and thus to the denial of the possibility of scientific foresight, the true leadership of economic life. The law of value even under socialism has an objective character, is a reflection of the processes of economic life that take place independently of the will of people. The fundamental mistake of many economists who studied the operation of the law of value under socialism was that, instead of investigating the reasons for the preservation, the nature, features of commodity production under socialism, determining the operation of the law of value, they took as a starting point the qualitative heterogeneity of labor and the impossibility of at the socialist stage of development of society, to measure different types of labor directly in units of working time. Various explanations for the necessity of cost commensuration of labor costs have led some economists to various erroneous concepts regarding the reasons for the preservation of the law of value under socialism. In the light of Stalin's work Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR, it became quite obvious that in all these concepts the question of the operation of the law of value under socialism was replaced by the question of the use of forms of value. The fact that the forms of value, money, cost, price, etc., are successfully applied throughout the national economy has been deeply mistaken by some economists as an indicator of the universality of the law of value. In fact, strictly limited, provided under the law of value under socialism is due to being stored in a certain range of commodity production and commodity circulation, which, in turn, caused by the existence of two forms of socialist property, public and collective farm. Limiting the scope of the law of value under socialism. The features and boundaries of commodity production under socialism also explain the features and boundaries of the operation of the law of value in socialist society. The limitedness of commodity production predetermines the limited operation of the law of value. Features of commodity production determine the features of the operation of this law. During the transition period from capitalism to socialism, the law of value did not have the same scope under socialism as it did under capitalism, where it is a regulator of production. The scope of the law of value and the degree of its impact on production under socialism are strictly limited. The decisive economic conditions that limit the scope of the law of value under socialism are factors such as public ownership of the means of production in cities and villages, the elimination of the system of wage labor and the system of exploitation, the operation of the law of planned development of the national economy in accordance with the goal determined the basic economic law of socialism. Consequently, the operation of the law of value is also limited to annual and long-term plans and the entire economic policy of the Communist Party and the Soviet government, based on the requirements of the law of planned development of the national economy. Under these conditions, the law of value can in no way be a regulator of production. The directly social nature of labor under socialism excludes the operation of the law of value as a regulator of socialist production. The goal of socialist production is not profit, but a person with his needs, not an increase in value, but the creation of the largest possible amount of labor products of better quality and range. Socialist production is subordinated to the requirements of the basic economic law of socialism, ensuring maximum satisfaction of the constantly growing material and cultural needs of the entire society through the continuous growth and improvement of socialist production on the basis of higher technology. Socialistically organized labor does not need any special social recognition through the market. Systematically organized labor costs in individual enterprises and in various branches of production directly act as a share of total social labor. The distribution of labor between branches of production under socialism is determined not by the law of value, but by the requirements of the basic economic law and the law of planned development of the national economy, which are reflected in annual and 5-year plans. This is confirmed by the entire course of development of the Soviet economy, by the entire practice of socialist construction. The operation of the law of value, if it played the role of a regulator of production, would have to be expressed, first of all, in the priority development of those branches of production that are most profitable, give the greatest income for each ruble of costs or per unit of output. It is to these branches of production that material, labor and monetary resources should be directed first of all, if the law of value was a regulator of production. As for the less profitable branches of production, on the basis of the regulatory action of the law of value, they would have to develop more slowly, and unprofitable and, moreover, completely unprofitable enterprises should be closed. There was nothing of the kind and is not present in the Soviet economy. On the contrary, heavy industry has developed and is developing in our country faster than light industry, despite the fact that the current profitability, that is, profitability at a given time, of heavy industry enterprises is often significantly lower than the current profitability of light industry. And this happens because the proportions of the distribution of labor between different branches of production are regulated not by the law of value, not by the profitability of individual enterprises and branches of production, but by the basic economic law of socialism, which determines the primacy of the production of means of production over the production of means of consumption, as a condition for the continuous growth of production. It is quite obvious that it is impossible to explain the peculiarities of the socialist industrialization of our country, if we proceed from the regulating role of the law of value in production. Recognizing the law of value as the regulator of socialist production would mean abandoning the primacy of the production of means of production in favor of the production of means of consumption and, thereby, destroying the possibility of continuous growth of our national economy. The operation of the law of value as a regulator of production under capitalism inevitably leads to periodic crises of overproduction, as is the case in all capitalist countries, despite the low growth rates of production in these countries. In economic crises, the destructive actions of the law of value as a spontaneous regulator of capitalist production are most clearly manifested. In the Soviet economy, on the other hand, with its continuous and rapid growth of socialist production, not only economic crises are not observed, but their very possibility has been eliminated. This is ensured by the socialization of the means of production and the ensuing actions of the law of planned development of the national economy, which replaced the law of competition and anarchy of production under capitalism. The operation of the law of planned development and planning of the national economy in accordance with the requirements of the basic economic law of socialism provide the highest form of durable and constant profitability of the economy, saving us from economic crises and ensuring continuous and rapid economic growth. It is this highest and constant profitability, considered from the point of view of the entire national economy in the context of many years, and not the level of current profitability of individual enterprises and sectors of the economy, that is the main criterion for the planned distribution of labor between sectors of production in a socialist society. The law of value does not play the role of a regulator in our country also in the sphere of marketing the means of production and supplying them to socialist enterprises. The operation of the law of value would be regulating in this area only if the prices of the means of production were determined by their value and the sale of the means of production would depend on the level of prices for them and on the profitability of their use. In fact, the wholesale prices at which the means of production are transferred to the disposal of state-owned enterprises do not have any significant effect on the distribution of the means of production and are set not on the basis of the law of value, but in such a way as to provide enterprises with the necessary profits and stimulate more rational and efficient use of means of production in order to fulfill and overfulfill plans. When setting prices for means of production, the state takes into account their cost, but this accounting has nothing to do with the operation of the law of value as a regulator. The socialist state does not sell the means of production to any buyer, but systematically distributes them among socialist enterprises. The distribution of the means of production, along with the distribution of labor resources, is known to be of decisive importance in the entire process of reproduction. The law of value is the regulator of production only in the presence of private ownership of the means of production, in the presence of competition, anarchy of production. None of this exists in the socialist economy. Therefore, the law of value can in no way be a regulator of socialist production.